You ever have this moment where someone looks at you and says something painfully accurate about you? Not rude, not critical, just true. And instead of feeling relieved or seen, your chest tightens. They say it gently, even kindly. I feel like you carry a lot more than you let on. You're quieter when you're actually thinking the most. You don't like being needed. You like being left alone. And your brain doesn't go, wow, they really get me. It goes, why do I suddenly feel naked? You laugh it off, you change the subject, you make a joke, or you go weirdly silent, like someone just opened a door you'd carefully kept shut. Maybe it's you. Maybe it's someone you know. Maybe you've watched someone flinch at understanding the way others flinch at judgment. Because here's the strange thing. Being misunderstood hurts, but being understood can feel even more dangerous. And that reaction, that subtle panic when someone really sees you, isn't random. There's a quiet psychology behind it, one that has less to do with ego and more to do with safety, control, and the stories you learned early about what happens when people get too close. Let's talk about why being understood can feel exposing and why, for some people, it feels like standing under a spotlight you never agreed to. Picture this. You're talking to someone new, maybe a coworker, maybe a friend of a friend. The conversation is light, surface level, safe. You're saying the right things, playing the version of yourself that works in public. Then suddenly, they tilt their head and say, "Can I ask you something?" And before you can brace yourself, they land on something specific, not vague, not generic, something precise. And it's like your internal alarm goes off. This is the first profile, the people who learned early that being seen meant being evaluated. These are often people who grew up in environments where attention wasn't neutral, it came with strings. If someone noticed you, it usually meant feedback, correction, or expectation. Being understood wasn't comforting, it was a prelude. So now, as an adult, when someone truly gets you, your nervous system doesn't hear connection, it hears assessment. Understanding feels like exposure, because exposure once meant consequences. You might notice this if compliments make you uneasy, or if someone says something accurate about you and your instinct is to downplay it. Oh no, it's not that deep. You're overthinking me. I'm actually pretty simple. You're not rejecting the person, you're protecting the version of yourself that learned safety, lived in being unreadable. And here's the quiet irony. People like this are often excellent at understanding others. They read rooms, they pick up subtext, they sense moods before words appear. But when the spotlight turns back on them, that's when it gets uncomfortable. Then there's another type, and this one's subtler. These are the people who have built their identity around control. Not control in a domineering way, control as in self-containment, emotional autonomy, the quiet pride of being low maintenance, self-aware, or not dramatic. They know themselves, or at least they think they do. So when someone understands them, it's not just exposure, it's disruption. Because suddenly your inner world isn't yours alone anymore. Someone else can name your patterns, predict your reactions, notice when you're pulling away before you've even admitted it to yourself. And that can feel threatening.
Not because they're wrong, but because they're right. For people like this, privacy isn't secrecy, it's sovereignty. Their inner life is where they feel most in control, where they process, decide, and recalibrate without interference. When someone enters that space, even kindly, it can feel like a boundary violation. You might recognize this if you get uncomfortable when someone finishes your sentences, or if you feel strangely irritated when someone says, "I know what you're about to say." It's not that you don't want closeness. It's that closeness, to you, has always been something you manage carefully. And being understood skips the negotiation. Then there's a third group, people who associate being understood with being locked in. This often shows up in people who value freedom, fluidity, or reinvention, people who don't like labels, who resist being figured out. When someone understands you deeply, it can feel like they're pinning you to a corkboard. Oh, you're that kind of person. You always do this. I know you. You'd never want that. Even if the understanding is accurate in the moment, it can feel constraining, like now you have to stay consistent with the version of yourself they see. So instead of feeling known, you feel boxed. These people often pull away right after moments of intimacy, not because the connection was bad, but because it was too defining. You might notice a pattern where, just as someone starts to really get you, you feel an urge to change something, distance yourself, shift roles, reassert ambiguity. It's a quiet rebellion against being fixed in someone else's mind. For you, exposure isn't just vulnerability, it's permanence. And that's what feels heavy. But here's the twist, and this is where it gets uncomfortable. Sometimes being understood feels exposing, not because of the other person, but because it confronts the stories you tell yourself. There are people who've built their self-image around being unseen, the misunderstood one, the outsider, the one no one really gets. That identity can be painful, but it can also be familiar, even protective. So when someone suddenly understands you, it disrupts that narrative. If someone sees you clearly and accepts you, what does that say about all the times you assumed no one ever could? It forces a reckoning. You might notice this if you feel suspicious when someone gets you too fast, or if your first thought is, they don't really know me, they just think they do. Sometimes that's true, but sometimes it's a defense, because being understood removes an excuse. It removes the distance.
It creates intimacy without asking permission. And for people who rely on distance, ambiguity, or self-containment to feel safe, that can feel like standing in bright light without warning. So if this resonated, here's the gentler reframe. Feeling exposed when someone understands you doesn't mean you're broken, avoidant, or incapable of closeness. It often means you learned to survive by managing how much of yourself was visible. And unlearning that isn't about forcing vulnerability. It's about learning discernment, choosing when, how, and with whom understanding is shared. Because the goal isn't to be fully seen by everyone. It's to feel safe enough to be seen by the right people. So take a moment and reflect. When someone understands you, what part of you feels threatened? Your privacy, your control, your freedom, or your safety? Which version sounded most like you? And what would it look like to let understanding be something you invite, rather than something that happens to you? If this stirred something, you're not alone. And if you want to explore more of these quiet inner patterns, the ones most people never talk about, you know where to find this channel. Sometimes the most revealing psychology lives in the moments we don't know how to explain, and this might be one of them.